Okay.
All right.
All right, guys. This is I'm Telling God About This, where we bring the nonsense to God and God into our nonsense. Today, we're going to be talking about Super Tuesday. But we're not going to jump on that right away. We're going to go talk a little bit about some weird and interesting trends that's happening, some weight loss trends that people are abusing or misusing. Ozempic, it's a diabetes shot that makes you feel fuller. And what happened apparently is it was being tested with a bunch of people on diabetes, and it worked great for them. And people decided, well, let me try it because it helps with a little bit of weight loss. And turns out you can not eat for a very long period of time and not feel hungry with Ozempic.
Is it basically just like an appetite suppressant? Is that its main
it makes the stuff in your stomach or the food in your stomach process a lot slower, so you feel full longer. And what it's doing essentially is just starving people. It's not healthy at all.
I saw this interview with this doctor who was like, the issue with Ozempic or whatever its technical name is that people are getting lighter in the sense that they weigh less, but because they're disproportionately losing muscle mass, they're actually in some sense getting fatter proportionally.
Yeah,
because
you're actually losing muscle mass really quickly on Ozempic as well. So it's not just losing weight, and you don't get to choose where the fat is being lost. So you have
you
like
go lipo for that.
Yeah, so you got like it takes away like the subcutaneous fat in your cheeks and in your face, and so like people's face starts sagging, and it's like there's
so you
not
get
enough
face. Just
you get right. That's like
Anderson? Is that new data?
Face.
That I hadn't heard that. I've studied this quite a bit. I haven't heard there's this Ozempic face thing happening. Is that a new thing they've started to find?
I think it's again.
No, it's just a byproduct.
Some people have it that happens, and other people don't. If you take Ozempic and you're already skinny, where's the fat gonna come from?
So
that you're losing.
You see this,
right?
Yeah, you see it across the board. It's like that. Like you think of like your stereotypical like crackhead or meth head. Like you lose all of like as you start to like lose fat and stuff in your body, you're like your face thins out. You'll burn through your fat reserves and all of that first, and then you'll start to like atrophy. Like your body will actually start to consume muscle, break down muscle because it needs to power itself. You see it a lot across the board, which is funny because I think this ties in with I was watching the comment section with Brett Cooper the other day, and she was talking about how there's this whole thing about Gen Z aging like milk, like how they look younger. I mean, they look way older than millennials did at that age. And she was like breaking this whole thing. Yeah, because they're doing all of these things. Like what it kind of rolled up into was basically this notion that like this younger generation, they're doing all these fillers, they're doing Botox, they're doing all of these things that normally
which
only
is so
like
dumb because old people do that to look like the young people.
Yes,
and now the young people are doing it to look like Madonna, I guess.
Right,
like,
that's the byproduct is that they end up looking like older women trying to look young. And she pulled up this one clip. I wish I had it up, but it was like she pulled up this one clip of this girl, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm 23," and people thought she was like 45, and I was like, "Yeah, I would have said 48 for sure." This girl was like 23 years old.
Look at this.
What do you think? Go to a plastic surgeon. You're like, make me look like a wine mom.
Look at this. Look at this. You guys see this? Yeah. So this is right. So here's the thing. There's something called a buccal fat removal, where it's like the cheek fat that you have. They remove it, and it causes like you look like Mary-Kate and Ashley. Like it sucks in, right? And you got these high cheekbones, right? So you have like these before and after of some of these celebrities where they don't even look the same. Really affecting.
Right.
No, they don't. Like it's like wholesome beauty of simplistic beauty, and then you just like suck into your skeleton, right?
Yeah.
I want to say though, I don't think that they didn't start this trend. I think the person who rocked it the best was Nikola Tesla. I'm just saying that it was so
That's horrible.
Before the man was before his time, not just in technology, but also in
that
trends.
escalated quickly,
right?
So high level, the face visualizations. It's not doing something specifically to their face. It's doing that all over their whole body.
Yeah, all over their body.
And then, there are some, like Barry Weiss on the Honestly podcast did a really, really good 1.5 hour interview with people on both sides of the fence about this drug, and it was really good. So if you really want the science from doctors on both sides, go listen to that podcast. But I think the more interesting thing to go after too here is like, this is another cultural trend of people choosing the quote unquote easy path.
Yes.
And
yes.
the negative repercussions. And we live in a world of have it your way right now. Ozempic is just another story. So people are listening and they might be a little bit overweight. They might be thinking about Ozempic. There may be any number of a million things. But I think more importantly is like, why is Ozempic a bad idea? We don't know yet. The jury's still out. There's a lot of
let me play devil's advocate on it, because I heard.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard one argument because a lot of the critics, and I was one of them. I am a critic mostly. I think like you should just do it in a healthy way that's not going to have maybe side effects or whatever and so on. But the criticism was that people who are opposed to it are imagining that the choice is between being skinny the right way and being skinny via drugs. And that's not actually the real choice that these people are facing. It's continue to be fat or be skinnier on drugs, right? And so strictly speaking, it's quite plausible that over a long term, provided they actually lose it and keep it off, that they are better off health-wise just for having lost the weight in the way that they could.
Yeah, that's always the issue. It's the balance of is the cure. It's a balance of like, this is not great for you, but the alternative is way worse. Like that's
here's my thing
that's
with that,
the mentality.
When
people are talking about
testing,
the implications of heart disease. And this drug, like there's a very serious conversation around the overweight obesity problem in America.
A big thing.
Yeah.
The problem is
this might be a solve.
Here's the thing though, with this drug though, they did testing initially. They did testing on a controlled group of people, right, who had diabetes, right? That's who they did the testing on. I don't think there's been any long-term tests on people that don't have diabetes taking this drug.
Yeah, I mean, there should be a natural
there's no long-term. There's nothing long-term.
Yeah, but I want to go. Go ahead, Josh. Finish what you're saying.
So we don't know what the long-term effects of this are going to be, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to you give the West or people the option to take the easy road. Yeah. They'll take the risk, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that because to me that's what's interesting. Like they're smarter. Kind of Nick's pointed out. Like there are a lot smarter people than us who can talk about the medical, the scientific, the implications on that. What strikes a note though is like this is par for the course for our society. It's not a question of, hey, can I lose weight? It's, hey, can I lose weight the right way? It's just another pattern of humanity typified in the West.
Yeah.
Because we have the luxury of having those options.
Well,
but
and particularly
it's how do we bypass the fall? I mean, that's really what it is. It's like, hey, I want to not work hard and have the thing that I want. I want to not age. Going back to the beauty thing, like why is Gen Z aging like milk? It's because they're not okay with the concept of mortality. Like they're really uncomfortable with it in their 20s, which is kind of mind blowing. It's and then you got the rest of us. You see that comparison to like aging gracefully. Like what does that mean? Well, aging gracefully is about recognizing that we're going to die and that's okay. In fact, it's not just okay. It's a good thing. Like, like that's the difference of the perspective. And same with like taking care of our bodies, And
with Christians in particular, I mean, like if you follow the biblical narrative around sanctification, right? The idea is that you seize upon the challenges that you're given, and that is what builds not only your own, virtues and self-control and all of that stuff, but it builds your faith as well.
Yeah.
And so if you've got, like, what is it, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, frankly, for a world that doesn't really have that much in the way of trials, people are like, oh gosh, how do I grow my faith? It's like, well, maybe start with those things that are right in front of you, fatty.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about food. And I'm not talking about food.
No, it's the same with it's all of those things. It's that idea that like we're so spun up on these highbrow things a lot of the time. And I mean, we're saying that as a podcast, even people who enjoy talking about highbrow things. I'm not saying that that's not that there's no place for that. But what I'm saying is for most people especially that I talk to that are dealing with existential crisis, like, well, oh, Josh, if I could wrap my head around this problem of, God, or like this problem of like the young earth or whatever the apologetic narrative is, then I'd be able to go that. And I'm like, hey man, I got news for you. The mystery of the universe and the vastness of God is incomprehensible. So like quit while you're ahead, man, and just focus on like what we got going on right in front of us, which is, where I see it the most is actually, believe it or not, it's in work. And I think as men, we struggle with this a lot because, and I'm certainly guilty of this because I'm an ambitious person. And it's always the next thing. If I could get to this stage, if I could get to that next thing, that it was going to be better. Or if I was doing a different type of work, that it would be more fulfilling. And it is more fulfilling. Like, I think certain work is more fulfilling than other work. But at the end of the day, it's part of the curse. All work is work. If we do it to sustain ourselves and we do it for, to take care of our families and to promote it, then it will be that.
Well, and the irony of it is, though,
is
that the curse, we talk about as curses as if it's something that we should avoid. And all of the measures that we take to try and avoid the curse actually make things worse. Like if you don't work, you lack the fulfillment, the self-validation that comes from having done that work and done it. Yeah, discipline, all these things. And so, I'm not at all convinced that those curses were, in the strictest sense, something to be bypassed so much as they were something to be actually taken on.
Yeah. No, I think it was a grace. I think it was like a way that God ensured. Like, if you think about it, think about this. Humanity hears Adam and Eve in the garden. They walk with God, the fledgling creations, beauty, and all this stuff. They know what it is to walk with a greater manifest presence of God than any human has ever experienced, apart from them. And maybe Enoch, who knows? But, apart from like that picture, like that's all we've got.
So I just watched that rabbit trail spin out of your skull.
I stopped it.
Like,
I'm gonna put a pin in that. So hold on. So hold on. So he puts this. I gotta finish this thought. So Adam and Eve get to spend that time with God, and then God kicks them out of the garden, and He no longer is like walking with them in the same way. And so, what does He give them though in place of that? It's like we lose the connection to like walk face to face with God in that same way. And then what do we gain? We gain hardship, we gain adversity, and we gain trials. And I think you nailed it, Tim. That's exactly what it is it's like, that was the grace that through that we would be dependent. We would be reliant. We would not find fulfillment outside of that. And so we would be drawn to that vacuum,
And to like just go slightly off topic, but in that same, like, what was the other part of that curse that was given to women, right? It was pain in childbirth, right? And now we find out that there's medically demonstrable links between like Pitocin and postpartum depression and things like that. And you start to like wonder, like, oh gosh, how many? And I'm not saying those are bad things or like they're not, they don't have their place. I'm just saying that it's another example of an area where an attempt to kind of like bypass aspects of those hardships that were specifically given to us have unforeseen negative consequences of their own.
Yeah.
Well, and that's always the thing happens. Is in the garden, I mean, there was work, right? There was that was one of the first things that Adam was to do. So we're built to work. We just we have thorns now, right? Like it's just the harder work.
There's suffering.
Being separated from God kind of helps us to direct through our suffering, through our tribulations and our trials, to focus on God. So I see where you're kind of going with that. The question though that I really wanted to ask is, if you're fasting on Ozempic, does it count? That's what I want to know.
If you're fasting,
performance enhancing drugs,
performance enhancing fasting. Like
no. Sort of the sanctification improves it. Sanctification in advance. I can't even get it out.
The plus 10.
Oh Lord, that's a hashtag for you.
All right. Well, enough of that. Gosh.
Try fasting with this one weird trick. Oh my gosh.
It's almost as bad as
marketing
Lent.
that
Bro,
to the Catholic community, let me tell
Do
you.
you think? No, seriously. Do you think for a second that if there was some sort of like wonder drug that made fasting easier, right? That wouldn't be something that Christians would totally take advantage of and be like, "Hey, let's be more pious." But here's the little.
Yeah,
here's the
it's
good
almost like
stuff,
if
right?
we all just did it at the same time, it would be easier for everyone to say that we fast.
Well, I just only on
I don't
Fridays
need to
make
have
Chick-fil-A
It's not
personal.
the same
fillets.
thing as
I don't need to have
fasting unity.
personal
Suffering.
discipline. I
I'm
would
being
prefer to be
participating in
dragged
the body of
along by
Christ.
peer pressure and
That's
fear
right.
of excommunication.
That's right.
Sorry, that's neither here nor
Anyway,
You
there.
would just,
I
if
think
you were
we could-
Catholic,
But God
you would be-
redeems all things, Nick. God can redeem all things.
You would just fast
So
the 40
then.
days after Lent, just to be like, I'm not like you people.
I'm not telling you
Yeah,
when I'm
that's right.
fasting. All right, and I'm
I'm
certainly
fasting
not
not 'cause you
marking my
told me to.
forehead for it. Anyway,
Dude, one of these days we got to go after the topic because right on the heels of the Ozempic conversation is the live forever conversation that is really
let's talk
happening right
transhumanism.
now.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
Oh my
but
gosh.
not right now. We'll do that.
No.
when
Why
we get
not?
around to it.
Come on, transhumanism. It's
I
all
wanna be
the
more-
same idea.
I want to be
Same
more
idea.
prepared.
Yeah,
That's
you
fair.
pulled
Let's
back
talk
Enoch, and that
transhumanism
used
later.
up all of your self-control, didn't it?
It
Now
did.
it's-
Game on. We got like 45 more
live.
minutes.
Yeah.
45
All right, so
more
let's
minutes.
Let's talk Super Tuesday. If you didn't go out to vote, you're a terrible person. But what I will say
No
is
judgment.
Moral
that
responsibility.
The responses or the numbers, I guess, didn't really matter too much. But yeah, Super Tuesday, the electing of the candidates for the Republican and Democrat Party, also who is going to be running for congressman and Senate. So yeah, a lot of good stuff there. And what that kind of brought
My ballot
forth,
didn't have that on it. You said something about congressman as well. I
Yeah,
only
you could
saw
vote for-
presidential
yeah,
candidates.
we only
on
had
mine.
president here.
Oh,
Every
okay.
state's different.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
we
Cool.
were just president primary
That's what I
around
thought.
here, Nick.
Okay. Well, if you think that I'm wrong, leave a comment in the comment section. I will recant what I said. But when I was looking it up, it was all kinds of different things.
You were
for
like
Super Tuesday,
honeypotted
so-
by a fake polling place.
Was.
You know?
Oh my gosh! I accidentally
They were
voted
just trying
for
to
Joe
figure out
Biden
who
as a
you were gonna vote
Republican.
for.
I don't know how that was possible, but I did. Anyway, so yeah.
So go ahead.
go ahead. Sorry. Let's
yeah, I
move
was just
on
gonna
to this
say-
conversation.
Yeah. So one of the things, if you haven't figured out as a byproduct of this podcast is, some of the content and stuff that we talk about is shaped somewhat by what each of us do, and one of my constraints is talking about politics in specific ways. And so we were talking kind of offline about how to kind of go after this because it's important, right? I mean, even as a pastor, and how do we talk about our civic duty, our moral obligation? What does it mean for Christians? I said it before on this podcast that, it's the parable of the talents. If you were born in this country, in America, then you have a right to vote, then that is something that has been given to you that, you are accountable for how you use that, how you exercise your rights and your freedoms as an American. I do believe that God expects us to utilize that for His glory.
Yeah.
That segment.
So I don't know if you guys are aware of some of the wars that are going on right now, but as it turns out, the largest number of people currently engaged in conflict is actually defending Super Earth from the automatons and the bugs in Helldivers 2. There are more people presently engaged in that conflict than Ukraine.
And you know what's
I don't even know what
unjust
you're talking
is that
about right now.
service guarantees citizenship, and I can't serve because I have taxation without representation as part of
Right.
the Xbox community.
Right.
And a Mac
I
user.
need
So
an
you don't know about
outcast.
Helldivers.
I don't
So
have
that's
no
a video
idea
game.
what either of you two
Yeah.
are talking
Helldivers 2
about.
is a video game.
It's like a kind
Yeah.
of a Starship Troopers themed, massively multiplayer, like
Let's back
objective oriented thing.
Why
right?
can't Josh play it?
up because it's a PlayStation and PC only game at the moment. And clearly the best fighters in the galaxy are the Halo generation. And we are unable to contribute, unable to
PC master race,
aid
all
the
the way.
PC master race that is clearly struggling.
Yeah, so because
It's-
it's like got its built-in like fascist satire, I guess, and so they named the democracy of Super Earth it's called managed democracy. And so instead of going and like voting per se, you go in and you basically answer like a personality quiz, and it translates that into a actual like allocated vote for whatever. Yeah, right.
that
It's
like
well,
Hunger
we'll just-
Games?
Hold on. Yeah,
Right?
let's pause on that because that's hilarious. So this whole thing is
Holy
based off
crap.
of this is a good transition for the actual like philosophical part of this because that's the thing that's crazy is so Highline's book Starship Troopers was written at so most people know about Starship Troopers as a movie, okay?
No, most people
It
don't.
was a
Our
book.
generation does.
No, most people today know of Starship Troopers as the movie. They don't know
Okay.
about the book. The people who know about the book are our generation or older because the book was written in like the 50s. And that's why it was written as a space epic was because he was looking at how to talk about these advanced concepts of like what would happen when society would fail and be rebuilt. And the only way he could see that was that it would have to take place so far in the future for like what would be a legitimate timeline for what would take place to talk about what a rebuilt global society would look like. And so he does this through this narrative of like following a young man and his group of friends basically in the far future coming out of high school and going, through this officer's journey, right? But he has this great it's a serious social commentary. However, it's fascist in the sense that it's about strong civil government. And the idea is that they basically come to the conclusion that when the world falls apart, the veterans kind of pull everything back together. And they say, hey, we're not going to let people vote on us going to jail or being hung if they haven't contributed to society. And so they come up with this concept. It's like service guarantees citizenship. If you serve society in the government or in the military, then you receive citizenship. Citizens and legal residents have all of the exact same privileges, save one. They can't vote. Okay? And you can't pass that on. So once you're a citizen, your kids aren't automatically citizens either.
Right.
So
Now, the Helldivers universe explicitly wanted to do a satirization of that kind of Starship Troopers thing, which is
because it follows
not-
the movie. The
Right,
movie
right.
was a critique. That's what I'm getting at. The movie
Right.
was a critique of the fascist. They viewed
Of
it
the
as
book,
an ultra-fascist book, which it's not in
but it
the
still
way that
slaps.
people look at it.
Like,
Oh, it's
they
awesome.
They almost couldn't satirize it effectively because it still works. Like,
So good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like
Yeah.
to know more? Comments.
yeah.
Anyway,
The,
so the game, satired.
Yeah, so what's really interesting though is like even today, you don't really realize it until you like go and think about it. But we can have like two separate people going to vote with completely different concepts of why they're even doing it and what that entitles let's say the winners, right, to do or not do. And so you have all these different competing theories of where is the government deriving its authority from, right? And what makes it legitimate? Because like obviously in the medieval era, and even before that, it was a common thing, but the idea, some form of like a divine right of king. It's like the king is the king because he's the king, and God, whatever God, is relevant in the particular culture, made him king. So therefore he can just do as he pleases. He's been ordained by the God, or obviously going back older than that, they would claim to actually be gods, like in the case of the Egyptians and Sumerians and things like that. One of the really interesting ones, though, the longest running, I think, continuous basis, like philosophical basis for the legitimacy of government is in China. And what's so interesting about it is that it survived many different forms of their government. And it goes back to the Zhao dynasty, which would have been around the same time as I think King
Zhou.
David. Zhou
dynasty.
Yeah, I'm not a Sinophile like Hughes
It's
is
okay.
over here. The
We'll
Zhou dynasty. I'm sorry, that doesn't sound as cool. Zhao
ZH is Zhou.
sounds more Chinese.
Well,
to
that would
me.
be more of an X.
Yeah.
XIAO.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they basically took over in China, kicked the old guys out who had done a very poor job up to that point, and said, we have a right to rule because we are going to do better for the people. So we have the mandate of heaven. And as long as we execute government competently, for the good of these people. Therefore, we have that. And the Communist Party in China still maintains that today, that because, that their authority is basically derived from success and prosperity. And that's a really interesting distinction. And both in that and the divine right of kings, you have this idea that the ruler has this embedded responsibility to the people, even though they're not being, they're not being specifically granted that authority by the people that they're ruling over, right?
But yeah, isn't that the difference between the divine right of kings and the mandate of heaven? Is the mandate of heaven is like you're operating, and as long as you're ruling justly and you're doing what is right and good, then you're fine. But you could be overthrown if you don't do those things. With the divine right of kings, your authority comes from God. And there's nothing you can do to be criticized.
Right.
Like what you do is God's will.
That's the major distinction. Right? And because England didn't really start putting some of those constraints on that whole concept of the divine right of kings until Magna Carta, right?
Yeah. But what's ironic though is that this is at the root of it, which I think is very important, which is that authority to rule is divinely appointed, and that there is a divine consequence, because at the underlying basis is just like with pastors and with fathers and teachers. It's like we talk about people. If everybody is a believer, I like the Jewish congregation for this, the Jewish community for this, because they paint this picture very well. Everybody in that community is very devout, and there is a very real cost to their way of life if they are not in good standing with their community. Okay. And that's directly tied to whether or not they're in good standing with God based on the law. So if a person has a problem, they take it to the rabbinical court. They don't go to the legal court. Why? Because the legal court's derivative. What's the legal court going to do? Fine me or whatever? These people determine and make a ruling in justice on where I stand between my God and my community. And that is far more terrifying for a devout person who believes in God, who is living in a community of people who feel the same way, than a monetary or legal consequence. And so this is the thing that both the mandate of heaven and the divine right share in common, which is that if the assumption is that the ruler is operating in the understanding that they will be judged for how they behave in the mandate of heaven, where they will lose their authority, or under the divine right, where they will give account to God for how they wielded the authority. Because even if you look at David,
and you also got to remember, I see Anderson being all skeptical. The divine right of kings largely coexisted with papal authority in Europe, so there's a lot of stuff baked in there. Yeah,
but it still comes from the same point that God. That's how it was. It's a question of how it was derived and taken. In the mandate of heaven, it comes from the more naturalist, animistic Eastern philosophy way of thinking, which is that if the weather changes, then that's God's will. Whereas we had the structure in the East, in the West, we had a structure based around a hierarchical church structure at that time. Mm-hmm. And so we had a mouthpiece for the divine, right?
Right.
And so because of that, the popes were able to what's the word I'm looking for? Anoint a king
and create guardrails. Frankly,
correct. They were able to anoint a king who had authority over the affairs of men, but not over the affairs of the church or the dividing of religion. Right, except for England, because they have the Church of England, was kind of weird.
Well, that's what I was going to make a point of, because with the church, right? You had the Pope. Before the Pope had power, the Pope didn't there was a Rome was sacked, and they had to get an army. They had to have the protection of an actual army to survive, right? And I think that's why there were so many popes that were French for a long period of time. All you Catholics, please comment in the comment section and tell me how wrong I am. But the aspect of the Pope having some sort of authority or moral authority over a king, that the king would be afraid because he'd have to answer to the Pope or answer to God. I don't think that really existed. I think
that's the thing. There wasn't a strict hierarchy between them, because there were basically spheres over which each had authority, and it was crossing into the others that really caused a problem. So if you were the Pope, you couldn't sit there and dictate domestic policy to Charlemagne.
Hence England's, right, when they separated in the Anglican Church, they didn't acknowledge. And what's interesting, speaking of different like government types, it's really interesting kind of like what happened. You had France and England, the Catholics and the Protestants being at war for a long period of time, and that actually factored into a lot of how they define something like natural rights or the way that popular sovereignty, or how they would go about it.
Which is exactly where all of that kind of stuff led to, when kind of the logical tenability of things like divine right, or even the uniformity of papal authority, right, started to deteriorate, right? We get to the Enlightenment, and that's where we start to get, things like natural rights, things like social contract, and it's weird to me that popular sovereignty, which really is just the idea that if enough people vote for it, therefore you
majority
have
rules.
Yeah,
that's
it's a weirdly humanistic, but also self-referential way of gathering authority, which is why I find it personally just really juvenile when people talk about like democracy as if it's not like one of the worst forms of government like in itself, because what they're really appealing to is popular sovereignty.
Yes.
If we win 51%, we can do whatever we want.
Right.
Whereas imagine being a king and having 49% of your population against you. Like, there's an obligation in some of these other systems for the sake of the ruler's, own continued stability, that you can't just and because everybody knows that you can't just inflict whatever you want on a minority, even if it's, 51% or 40% or less. And so that appeal to like the popular sovereignty idea is just holy.
Yeah. But do you see why, so this is a good point to point this out. Like, part of the reason these systems all break down, and, this is where I point out, and, Nick and I were both, international relations, government, shout out Helm School of Government guys back in the day. And the thing that's always fascinating to me when we study all these different, systems of government, especially these ones that try to sandwich in human, like the ability for a human to decide what is right for a bunch of other humans, devoid of a fixed point of reference, is that it all breaks down because it's wrong. Like, the reality is this: the perfect form of government is divine dictatorship. It's a theocracy with God at the top and us doing what he says. Like, that's the biblical mandate. And if you want any proof of that, like, just go to Samuel, right? Like, God straight up says, like, you don't want a king. I'll tell you why you don't want a king, because all of the things that we've just described, you're putting someone else's ability to say, like, hey, we want to, because ultimately, let's go to this. Like, what is the purpose of government? The purpose of government basically is to promote good and to punish evil. That's in Romans, I'm paraphrasing, and a bunch of other political theorists have, got at that, right? But at the root cause, why is this an issue? Because who gets to decide what good is and who gets to decide what evil is? And that's the fundamental disconnect between these concepts, because all forms of government are, if that definition holds, are effectively a mandate from heaven, because if we live in a created universe, if which the majority of the human population still believes, contrary to popular opinion, so that's kind of where we're at, is that, like, we govern based on the understanding of good and evil, and depending on what you understand where that comes from, that's where you derive your guiding principle.
And the further away you get from that true north, the messier things get.
Yeah,
that's right. And in light of the fact that we can't necessarily have divine dictatorship until Christ comes back and rules, but there are all these other systems of government, and that we can, I guess, acknowledge that there is objective moral truths, and not just kind of a secular humanistic trial and error development of human society. Like, what then is the best system, or is it dependent? Is it dependent?
I want to hear it, Josh.
Upon the culture. I'm saying, what do you think is the best? Dependent on the.
Here's the answer, in my opinion. I think that the answer is it all breaks down where the more power is consolidated to the singular point of failure, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the counsel of many, there's wisdom. If we believe, I think this is why God chose to utilize the church as the means to reach the world, is that through a council of like people who are indwelled with the Holy Spirit, that it's a buffer. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing all my, my academic work on, is this idea that where there's a greater manifest presence of God, there is a nerf effectively against human stupidity. And so in that logic, the federalist concept of pushing the power down as close to the people as humanly possible is going to result in the greatest check against the mass adoption of one man's or a few men's or women's interpretations of good and evil. And it allows each individual community to be accountable and to benefit from righteous and wise living. And so that was the brilliance of what the founders accomplished in the Constitution, was this idea that we would have a confederation of states that would allow for townships and counties and states to then move up, where at each higher level, because what they did understand also is that not all forms of governance work at every level. Certain things need to be handled at a higher level: national defense, economic, some other things. And so, but it's a pyramid where the smallest amount of power rises to the very top about a few fewer issues, whereas the majority of the power and its touch on the majority of issues rests at the base. And so that to me, at least in my viewing it from that lens of, how do we prevent 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 350 people's misconception impacting 300-400 million people's lives.
Quick question about what you've said. Where has that been the most successful? What system of government in history has demonstrated that vision?
Us and Switzerland.
Oh, I don't
So I don't know too much about Switzerland.
Well, you should, because our system of government is largely based on theirs. Like the first earliest confederation under a single like loosely knit groups of highly independent cloisters of populations was Switzerland. Switzerland was so effective at this, and they had a way of rallying to themselves using this confederacy model that our founding fathers based a lot of our model on what was happening in Switzerland. And there's a great video, actually. It's focused on Second Amendment, believe it or not, but on the concept of a regulated militia. But the guy who made it did a fantastic job of actually kind of painting that picture. If I find it, I'll
find that video and we'll put it in the video.
We'll put it in there.
Yep.
But that's where I would say we are historically the best at doing this so far in historically speaking. But we've lost that from basically World War II. Moving basically post Great Depression, we've been on a steady. That's when we've seen this massive consolidation of power at the federal level.
See, let me take.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Anderson.
I was going to say how much from a Christian standpoint of having Christian leaders and Christian ethics and morals is the foundational in the success of that model. Like if we had just a secular humanist society that used the same model, like would it be still the same successful?
That's the whole point. The idea that you're going to get 400 million people to be all on the same secular humanist model, like the only reason that happens is because what happens in the population centers of our country then becomes the law for the entire country. And so that's where we have these issues of there are things that are legal and illegal in our country that are only illegal and illegal in our country because of the large civic centers of our society in a very in a decentralized model, the way that California lives and works and governs can be very different from the way that Alabama lives and works, and they can still function and operate together. That's what makes it so great, is that the people in California have autonomy over their system of governance, and they're able to make changes and to do things that fit their belief system. So if you have populations within the country that are very secular, I would expect that their state government would look very different. And the things that they incentivize and decentivize, in other words, the evil that what they describe as evil would look different, and the things that they look at as good would look different. And there would be common ground because we have that in our Bill of Rights and in our Constitution that we consider like the national values. But all the middle ground stuff, there's a lot of wiggle room there. And that's why we have
and the issue, though, is that there used to be really clear delineations between, like, essentially the more local the form of government, the more they were allowed to do, and the less local, the less. And that distinction has mostly...
Yes.
Yeah, and that distinction has mostly disappeared in the post-World War II era. States have become more and more bound by the incorporation of the Bill of Rights, and if anything, it only still exists in the sense that, like, local governments. I mean, what the greatest form of tyranny you'll find today is a homeowners association.
Dude,
they're hanging.
My
it's an
gosh.
inverted pyramid now. Maximum authority on singular issues.
Over my dead body, will I ever buy anything that involves a homeowners association? I literally turn that off in the filters. I don't even want to see what's available if it has that.
No, the moment I see HOA, it's like, over my dead body. Nope.
When I lived in California, when I was living in California, the HOA was like $350. Like, there was 2 HOAs. It was crazy. It was ridiculous. And that's why you should leave California. That gets at an
important issue, though, is because really the issue that I find with HOAs is very similar to the main issues that I find with a lot of, let's say, like, bloated or, unaccountable forms of government, and that is that it is unaccountable, right?
Correct.
I think that as long as there are good, strong, direct feedback mechanisms to whoever's making the decisions, that, like, no, you don't get to say, oh, this is that department's policy, or this is what the people voted for, or like all these basically dodges that government, that it's like you're doing what you want, but you don't want to say so. You're acting like the drive to do certain things came from somewhere else. A king can't do that, right? A king has to own the choices that he makes, and so that's what you see mostly in politics today, not just like in America, but just everywhere, like all of that mealy-mouthed, oh, well, we did what we could, blah, 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 and so that all that, committeeing and bureaucracying. Yeah,
the faceless democracy. I mean, it's the faceless bureaucracy. And then that's exactly it. Like, if you, like, I've talked about this a lot with the notion of, like, with like social programs. Like, I mean, what is Jesus says to it? True religion is to take care of widows and orphans. Like, I have no issue with a society pooling resources to take care of those who are less fortunate. But imagine a world where the pool of money that you have to give to the people who are in need is restricted to where those people live. So if you live in a county and you are homeless, the only money available to you for social support is what is coming from that county. So imagine it being a small business owner and driving past a place like Skid Row, if Skid Row happened to exist in your county, which I argue it wouldn't in a model like this. Like, if I'm a business owner and I'm like, I'm getting raked over the coals in these social programs that I'm paying out the nose for because these people are homeless, and there's not that many of them. So I'm going to go get all my buddies who own businesses and these people, and we're going to go employ these individuals, or we're going to make them go live somewhere else.
Well, but here's the problem with that, right? And it gets at a deeper issue, is that the universality of the franchise in America has allowed people to vote to rob other people.
Yes,
right?
that's
like the idea that the idea that's even a thing you can do should not be
Yes.
the case. It creates
And it
there's
can't.
only one way that incentive will ever end.
Yeah.
Well, you can
And it-
choose not to buy a house with an HOA. You cannot choose, unless you're going to leave
not pay your
America,
taxes.
deny
But here's
your
the thing.
citizenship.
I want to challenge.
yeah.
I want
Which
to challenge
we are not
the one
encouraging
thing.
or not in favor of, and we're talking about moral and ethical issues here only.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, I want to challenge the idea that the responsibility to like take care of widows and orphans and Christian charity as a group is something that can or should be facilitated by the government. Because here's the kind of the thought experiment I want to throw out to you. Government taxes you, right? They implemented this tax before you were born. Okay, what it is, what it will go to. You never really had a say in that, in the sense that it is how it is.
Yeah.
And do you get moral credit, right, when God assesses your actions, right, your deeds, whether or not you have fulfilled your responsibilities? Do you get moral credit for the money that was taken from you to meet some of those needs?
What does moral credit mean?
No, I think yes. I think yes
does
and
God
no.
grant you
Yeah,
credit?
I would say yes.
In
I would
terms
say
of
yes and
evaluating
no.
your deeds.
Do
Okay.
I
Yeah,
get
I
an
think
extra
I think he
crown
does.
in heaven?
Yeah.
Well,
kind
because
of.
the Bible is really clear that judgment is not just a "did you go to heaven or not" thing.
Right.
There is definitely an element of your
What you did.
worth, you being evaluated, whether or not you to the extent to which you obeyed, to which you did different
Right.
things.
Not that the
so
not that
that's-
the payout is the issue. What the issue is a question of obedience, right? Like, did we do?
Right.
Are we being judged?
Right. Do
for,
I
again,
fulfill my obedience
correct.
obligations?
Here's what I'm getting at. In a democracy, in a republic, in the model that I'm explaining right now, I have an ownership and a stake. So therefore, if I am like the notion of Jesus when he says, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's," right? Well, that was Caesar's. It was his, not anybody else's, not the Senate's, not the people of Rome's. It was
Right.
Caesar's, right? And so Caesar will be accountable for all of the things done in Caesar's name, right? Here's the scary part as Americans, right? We are complicit
Yep.
in our
See,
government.
I
And
don't know if
so-
I buy it.
But
This is
I would
why
say
I have
this.
such a problem when
Here's-
people choose not to vote.
Correct. Here's what I'm getting at. Yes and no. I don't think it's that black and white in God's view. God knows what we are. I'm speaking about this philosophically, like from a political theory standpoint, and theologically in the sense that I err on the side of I'm complicit. However, I trust in the grace and
Sure.
mercy that God understands the nuance of what is actually happening. Because do I think that I have any real power or say in any like functionally meaningful way? I'm not entirely sure that I do. However, on paper,
And not as an individual, certainly.
correct. But in the sense that I, as a person, a sentient human being in this time period in history, I don't have to stay here if I don't want to. I don't have to remain an American citizen as a citizen if I don't want to. And so therefore, if I choose to engage in a form of government where then I get the ability to influence that, I'm accountable for what I do with that. So
Yeah,
if the government
I'm just not
does
sure
good,
that I would realistically be able to say, "Hey, God, I paid my taxes this month, so I've discharged my charitable obligations." I don't.
Oh
think
no,
that's,
no!
yeah.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't take it that far. No, but I'm just saying
Christian
that like
charity.
if
Well, right,
if
but
my
if you don't
society
take it
does
that
good
far, though-
things, then I think that that's a credit to the people of the society. That's what I'm getting at. I think that
Sure,
God would
yeah.
bless the people of
guess
that society.
the
If the society
disconnect that-
chose to take it, like Kenya, I think it was Kenya, might have been Uganda. I don't remember. One of them, it wasn't Kenya. It was like Uganda or another country in Africa went to the government and said, there are no more orphans. You will close all the orphanages and you bring the children who need homes to the church and we will place them in homes. So there are no orphans in this country anymore. They go to the church places
Wow.
them in homes, and there are no
never
more
heard that.
orphanages.
Yeah,
So-
and those are all
so do I
obviously
think
morally
God credits-
praiseworthy things.
Correct. I'm saying that that's a collective, like I'm saying when a society, like I think that when America was founded, when you consider the other countries that existed in the world at the time, do I think that the people who bled and who fought and who struggled to establish that Do I think that God credits the good that society did in the name of God to
Sure.
them? Yeah, I think he does.
But I guess I still challenge the idea that we should actually strive to fulfill those obligations through the government, right?
Yeah, I
even
would
the
agree with
example
that.
you,
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because that was the
because
church that did that.
I think it actually does rob you of the
Simultaneously, here's an
Go
interesting
ahead.
thought process because in the nonprofit industry, I see the amount of billions, potentially trillions in philanthropy. It is interesting to think about, yes, we're having a conversation about things that government can do, but what if, the Christian community did come together and say, we're going to solve this problem? And
Yeah.
we did have philanthropists alongside of us and billionaires alongside of us. And I don't know, I think a greater level of Western Christian unity could achieve something like that. And sure, the government
Well,
can
we have,
continue to
though.
spin on.
Look at what has happened to world hunger
Yeah.
under the hegemony of
sure.
America.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
You know,
Yeah.
Well, hegemony of America and world hunger is a little bit different than like a Christian
No more
focus.
orphans.
But
Yeah.
Sure.
I understand what you're saying.
my point is that doing well
Yeah,
is
Bono
itself
did great for AIDS in Africa and all the other things that have been done.
Yeah.
But and Bono was a Catholic. But I'm just saying it's an interesting thought experiment.
You're right, Nick. And I think if you look at that, like even that thought, like part of the reason that worked in whatever country that was in Africa that took place was that their government said, okay. Like, here's the point. If you lived in a state where the majority of the people had those values, then the laws would not prohibit the church from saying, bring the orphans to the church as a legal means of making sure that they're taken care of, right?
Well,
in a country where you are so diverse and where there is a much wider range of belief systems and values and fears and anxieties and opinions, it wouldn't even be legal to do that. So that's where I think the line between, and this is an age-old debate, especially in Christian circles, of like, how involved is the church in government? Are we striving to create a theocracy, or are we,
Right.
do we
With what you're talking about, though, regarding the church taking over, maybe there's no more orphans or there's no more hunger scarcity, and having the church take certain ownerships of where traditionally the government is doing. The difficulty that I run into or that I see is within Protestantism is that there's so many different factions. With the Catholic Church, they have like, this is the way it is, this is the authority, let's make this happen, this is our program, we make the decisions. However, I can't imagine trying to partner with an Episcopalian church or a PCRUS or whatever a church. Like it's the values, like especially when it comes to orphanages. I wouldn't trust kids to those denominations, So
Yeah.
I mean, this is the difficulty where I run into, where I think that there's the ideal, the practicality of it. I think we kind of need to step back, and I don't know if there's a solution in this,
well, the practicality is that you define what righteousness looks like, and the extent to which you allow people to deviate from that in your society. That's up for debate, but there's none of this argument over whether this thing or that thing is moral or
Sure.
whatever. You have to stick to it and say, no, that's the standard, that's the one we're going with, but we might not make it illegal, but just know that you're a godless degenerate.
Right. You can, that's the point. You don't have to punish. There's the middle ground, right? So like we promote good and we punish evil. But this is the issue. We promote good. And that's what has failed in our society. We don't promote
we don't even
good
agree
because
on
we
what's the
can't
good.
exactly.
Yeah.
We can't define good, so therefore we cannot promote good. And so we punish what we remember is evil. And I say remember is evil because that's all we're doing. If you ask most people, like the majority of people serving prison sentences, I mean, apart from like violent and evil crimes, like all the other stuff is becoming like questionable. I mean, like theft isn't wrong anymore.
Right.
All these things, right?
Depending
but also,
on
I
your
would also
social
challenge,
circumstance,
yeah, I would also say with that too, Josh, that like, again, hyper-localization is important because when you have the ability to legislate on your convictions as a society, people will self-select to leave that. And that's what we've lost is that's why we used to have cloisters. If you come over here to Europe, that's why it's so polarized. That's why people one day's drive away don't even talk the same, because for hundreds and or even thousands of years, these people have self-selected into hyper,
Homogeneous.
localized, homogeneous.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, Germany's not that much bigger than some of our states.
Right.
The people are very different than the Italians
Right.
and the French.
Well, so then maybe this is a good stopping point. Kind of the point to kind of take away from this is, I think that from a Christian standpoint, we really need to be involved more so in our local elections than we are in our federal elections, right? I remember,
Yes.
when the school board was being elected, and seems like it wasn't that big of a deal. I was reaching out to my, the church members that I have in the neighborhood and friends, and I'm like, this is important. This is important. This is going to determine the curriculum that's going to be in the school. This is going to be determining every day of our children's lives. So things like that. I think that that's probably a good conclusion. Well, we do need to be loyal overall to see the direction of where our country comes from. Even if we have a terrible, leadership in Washington, if we have a good leadership locally, then, life can still be sustainable, I think. And the good.
I agree. And on that note, for everyone listening at home, if you made it this far, hey, comment down in the comments. What do you think? What are your views on that? We want to read about it. If you have thoughts about
hereditary monarchy is the correct answer.
That's right. That's what we're looking for. The Confucian exam. What are your suggestions? What are the true forms of government? And we want to hear from you guys. Please leave your feedback, and thanks.
Cool. Have a great day, guys.
See ya.